The crack sounded small, no louder than a dry twig breaking under a shoe, but everyone in the upstairs hall heard it. Sydney Bowen stopped beside the linen closet with a cardboard box in her arms. Chad Solis stood in the doorway of her old room, holding the fiddle by its neck. The open case lay on the floor behind him, half buried under sweaters and books he had pulled from the closet. For 1 second, Chad looked almost sorry. Then he turned the fiddle over and saw the split running across its top. The crack began near the left edge, crossed the pale spruce, and ended beneath the fingerboard. "Well," he said, "it wasn't worth anything anyway." Sydney set the box down carefully. She didn't trust her hands. "Give it to me." "I was clearing the shelf. The case slid." "You took it out of the case. I was checking what it was. You knew what it was." Chad glanced toward the stairs. His mother was downstairs, speaking with a moving company. Isabella had spent the morning attaching colored stickers to furniture, red for storage, blue for the house, yellow for the workshop. Nothing had a sticker with Sydney's name. Chad lowered his voice. "Don't make this into some whole thing." Sydney stepped closer. "Give me my father's fiddle. He was my stepfather too. Then you should know how to hold one." That landed harder than she meant it to. Chad's face tightened. He was 10 years older, broader than Sydney, and used to winning family arguments by staying calm until everyone else looked unreasonable. He held the damaged fiddle between them, as if she were the one causing trouble. "You got this for free," he said. "I'm the one doing all the work here." Sydney looked past him. Her room no longer looked like a room. Her mattress leaned against the wall. The desk drawers stood open. A black trash bag held the curtains her mother had sewn years earlier, though Sydney had told Isabella she wanted them. "You're throwing my things into boxes. I'm clearing the house. It's been 4 days since the will reading, and the movers come Monday." Sydney held out her hand. Chad finally gave her the fiddle. He did it carelessly, but Sydney took it with both hands. Her father had taught her that much before she could remember. One hand at the neck, one beneath the lower block. Never squeeze. Never let the weight hang from the strings. The wood was cold. The crack shifted faintly under her thumb. Isabella came up the stairs carrying a roll of packing tape. "What happened?" "Nothing," Chad said. Sydney turned the fiddle so she could see. Isabella drew in a breath. She looked at her son first, then at Sydney, then back at the instrument. That order told Sydney everything. "It was an accident," Isabella said. "He took it out of the case. He's trying to help. I didn't ask him to clear my room. We've discussed this." No, they hadn't. Isabella had announced it over breakfast. Sydney would take what fit in Tammy Gross's car, and the rest would go into storage until everybody had time to sort it out. Everybody meant Isabella and Chad. Sydney touched the crack again. Her father had finished the fiddle in February, when he had been thin enough that his watch slid down his wrist. He had worked on it for nearly 7 years. Now, Chad had broken it in less than a minute. "I'll pay to have it glued," Chad said. "You don't even know what you did. It's a crack. It's the top plate. Fine. Whatever the proper word is." Isabella pressed her lips together. She was tired, and Sydney knew it. Michael's illness had taken something from everyone in the house. But grief had not made Isabella gentle. It had made her efficient. "We can ask Jacob," Isabella said. "If it can be repaired, he'll repair it." Chad gave a short laugh. That thing was the one thing nobody else wanted. The hall went quiet. Isabella looked at him sharply. She knew he had gone too far, though not far enough to make her openly correct him. Sydney placed the fiddle in its case. The lid would not close because 2 shirts had been stuffed beneath the lining. She removed them, folded them, and put them into the box by her feet. "What did he mean when he gave it to you?" Isabella asked. Sydney didn't answer. Michael had said, "Everything you need is already yours." At the time, Sydney thought he meant courage, or memory, or some other kind thing dying parents were expected to say. After the will reading, the words had begun to bother her. Now, looking at the cracked fiddle, they felt almost cruel. 6 weeks earlier, before the funeral flowers and the moving boxes, the house on Studio Hill Road had still moved to the rhythm of Michael Bowen's work. He rose before sunrise because pain kept him from sleeping. At first light, Sydney would hear the workshop door close beneath her bedroom. A few seconds later came the soft click of the task lamp over his bench. The Bowen and Hayes Violin Atelier occupied the first floor of the long addition behind the house. It smelled of maple shavings, varnish, coffee, and the old wool coat Jacob Hayes always hung beside the side door. Finished instruments stood inside glass cabinets. Repairs waited in padded trays with handwritten tags tied to their scrolls. Michael had spent 30 years making that room feel permanent. Even after the diagnosis, he sharpened his tools every Monday. Sydney found him there one cold morning in February. He sat at his bench beneath a green lamp, fitting a bridge to a fiddle she had never seen. "You're supposed to be in bed," she said. He didn't look up. "That's a terrible place to fit a bridge. You know what I mean." "I do." His hands had changed during the illness. The veins stood high beneath his skin, and his knuckles looked larger than they had in autumn. But when he held a knife, the blade moved exactly where he wanted. Sydney put a mug beside him. Tea, 1 spoon of honey, no milk. Coffee had begun to make him sick. "Isabella's looking for you. She usually is. She said you missed your medication." Michael glanced at the wall clock. "I didn't miss it. I postponed it. That sounds like missing it with extra words." He smiled. Sydney had missed that smile all winter, not because it was rare, but because it disappeared so quickly. Jacob worked at the other bench, replacing the worn edge of a cello. He had been Michael's apprentice since his early 20s and a full partner for 14 years. Most customers assumed they were brothers. They weren't much alike, but they had worked beside each other long enough to share a language made of nods, lifted eyebrows, and unfinished sentences. "Take the pills, Mike," Jacob said. "Traitor. I prefer employed partner." Michael set down the knife. Sydney brought him the pill bottle and waited until he swallowed. Only then did he lift the fiddle. It was plain at first glance. Honey-colored varnish, dark ebony fittings, no decorative inlay. But the edges were clean and confident. A narrow flame ran through the maple back when Sydney tilted it toward the light. "Whose is it?" she asked. "Yours." Sydney looked at him. Michael had repaired instruments for her. He had let her practice on old student violins that could survive being knocked against a music stand. He had never made one for her. "No, it isn't. It has been for a while." Jacob turned away from his cello. He wasn't surprised. That meant he had known something, though perhaps not everything. Sydney would remember that later. She accepted the fiddle carefully. "It feels new," she said. "It is new. No, I mean too new, like I'm going to hurt it." "You probably will." "Dad, every working instrument gets hurt. A fiddle that stays perfect usually stays quiet." He asked her to play. Sydney tucked it beneath her chin and drew the bow across the strings. The first note came out rough because her throat had tightened. She tried again. The room changed. The fiddle had a warm, lower voice, deeper than its size suggested. The sound wasn't huge, but it carried. Jacob stopped working. Even Isabella, who had come to the doorway with Michael's sweater over one arm, stayed still until Sydney finished. Michael watched her the whole time. "What wood did you use?" Sydney asked. "Old spruce?" "Older maple. From your private stock?" "Some of it." Jacob gave him a look. "Some of it?" Michael ignored him. Sydney lowered the fiddle. "How long have you been making this?" "Long enough. That isn't an answer. It's the answer you're getting today." He took the fiddle back and inspected the bridge. Sydney saw a small dark mark through the left sound hole, but Michael turned the instrument before she could study it. "Keep it in the case when you're not playing," he said. "Don't leave it near a radiator. Don't let Chad put his hands on it." From the doorway, Isabella said, "Michael? What?" "He holds instruments like garden tools." Jacob coughed into his sleeve to hide a laugh. Sydney smiled, but the smile faded when Michael began struggling to stand. She reached for his elbow. He leaned on her for one brief second, then acted as if he hadn't. At the door, he looked back at the fiddle. "Everything you need is already yours," he said. Sydney thought he was speaking about music. Michael died in March on a gray morning when rain ran down the kitchen windows. Sydney was beside his bed. Isabella stood on the other side, one hand resting on the blanket. Chad arrived 20 minutes too late and remained in the hall with his car keys in his fist. Jacob came after the hospice nurse. He went first to Michael's room, then downstairs to the workshop. Sydney found him there an hour later, sitting on the stool by Michael's bench. He had not touched anything. Sydney sat on the floor beside the wood cabinet. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The workshop clock ticked above the sink. Finally, Jacob said he hated that clock. Why didn't he replace it? He said disliking it kept him aware of the time. That sounded enough like Michael that Sydney laughed once. The laugh broke halfway through. Jacob reached down and rested his hand on her shoulder. "He was proud of you," he said. Sydney nodded because she couldn't answer. The funeral was held the following week. People filled the small church and stood along the back wall. Musicians came from Hartford, New Haven, New York, and towns Sydney had only heard about through repair labels. Several brought instruments Michael had made. At the reception, they told stories about him correcting bridges in restaurant bathrooms, arguing over varnish under parking lot lights, and refusing to rush work for important clients. Sydney listened until every story began to feel like another version of her father that belonged to someone else. Isabella accepted condolences near the front door. She wore black and remembered everyone's name. Chad kept one hand on her back and guided people toward the coffee. Sydney stood beside the coat room with the fiddle case at her feet. She had brought it because she thought she might play. When the time came, she couldn't open the case. Anthony Montgomery called the following Monday. He had handled Michael's legal affairs since before Sydney was born. His voice was slow and careful. "The family will meet here Friday morning," he told her. "There are matters in the will that require everyone's presence." Sydney sat on her bed while he spoke. The fiddle rested in its case beside the window. "Did he change it?" she asked. There was a pause. "I can't discuss the contents before the meeting. That means he changed it. It means I can't discuss it." Sydney thanked him and ended the call. For the next 4 days, Isabella moved through the house as if she were preparing for weather. She collected account statements. She labeled workshop records. She spent hours behind the office door with the business computer. Jacob came and went through the side entrance. His name was still on the partnership agreement, the workshop lease, and much of the equipment. Isabella couldn't simply remove him. She knew that, and so did he. Their politeness became very exact. On Thursday afternoon, Sydney found Isabella measuring the dining room windows. "Are you changing the curtains?" Sydney asked. "They're faded. Mom made those." Isabella let the tape measure retract. "Lauren made them a long time ago. They still work. I didn't say I was throwing them away." "You didn't say you weren't." Isabella studied her. "Sydney, this house can't become a museum. My father has been dead 3 weeks, and I'm still living here." Sydney had no answer that wouldn't become a fight. The will reading took place in Montgomery's office in Litchfield County. Rain tapped against the windows, and the heating vent clicked beneath Sydney's chair. Montgomery sat behind a broad desk. His white hair was neatly combed. He wore a dark suit that made the room feel more formal than Sydney expected. Isabella sat to Sydney's right. Chad sat beside his mother. Jacob had not been invited because he wasn't an heir, though the business terms affected him directly. Montgomery began with the house. Michael left the Studio Hill Road property to Isabella. Sydney looked down at her hands. Next came Michael's controlling share of the atelier. That went to Isabella as well, subject to Jacob's existing partnership rights, lease interest, and ownership of certain tools and equipment. Isabella made a note on a yellow pad. Chad received a cash inheritance. Montgomery stated the amount, and Chad's shoulders loosened. It was enough to matter. Sydney didn't look at him long enough to see his expression. Then Montgomery came to her. "To my daughter, Sydney Lauren Bowen. I leave the fiddle completed for her in February, together with its bow and case." Montgomery stopped reading. Sydney waited. A car passed outside on the wet street. "Is that all?" she asked. Montgomery folded one page over another. "That is the specific gift named for you. What about savings?" "The remaining accounts pass according to the residuary clause." "To Isabella?" "Yes." "And the workshop?" "As I explained, your father's controlling interest passes to Isabella, with Mr. Hayes retaining his existing rights." Sydney looked at Isabella. "Did you know?" Isabella's face remained still. "Not the details." Chad shifted in his chair. He knew his money was safe and wanted the meeting over. Montgomery took off his glasses. "Sydney, your father signed this will while mentally competent. I reviewed every provision with him. So he meant to do it." "Yes." The answer was respectful. That made it worse. Sydney stood, lifted the fiddle case, and walked out before anyone could offer her a ride. Isabella found her beneath the office awning. "Come back inside. I'm going home. We need to talk about what happens next." Sydney turned. "It sounds like you already know. I don't want you making decisions while you're upset. Do I still live there?" "For now." "For now?" Isabella rubbed her forehead. "The house is too large. The taxes are high. I may need to reorganize things. You inherited the business. I inherited responsibility for the business. And Chad got money. Your father made those choices, not me." Sydney held the case closer. Rain blew beneath the awning and spotted its black cover. Isabella's voice softened. You received something personal. A fiddle. Something he made with his own hands. Sydney looked at her stepmother. Would you trade the house for it? Isabella said nothing. That was the answer Sydney carried back to Studio Hill Road. 4 days later, Chad cracked the fiddle. Sydney packed the rest of her clothes before sunset. Isabella stood in the bedroom doorway while Sydney forced the case into a canvas shopping bag to keep the rain off it. You don't have to leave tonight, Isabella said. You said the movers come Monday. That doesn't mean you can't stay through the weekend. Tammy has a spare room. Tammy is 70. She doesn't need this dropped on her, she offered. Isabella looked toward the stairs. Chad had gone outside after their argument. He had not apologized. I can have someone look at the fiddle, Isabella said. Jacob will look at it. You shouldn't involve him in family disagreements. He was Dad's partner. He's angry about the will. He didn't break anything. Isabella flinched. Sydney saw it and almost apologized. Then she looked at the empty curtain rod above the window. The curtains were already in a black bag downstairs. She picked up her duffel. Tammy Gross arrived in an old station wagon with a cracked dashboard and 3 reusable grocery bags on the back seat. She didn't come inside. She opened the rear hatch, helped Sydney load the boxes, and waited until the last one was settled. Isabella remained on the porch. Call me tomorrow, she said. Sydney nodded without promising. Tammy drove slowly down Studio Hill Road. The workshop lights were still on below the house. Through the side window, Sydney saw Jacob standing at Michael's bench with his head bent over an instrument. She nearly asked Tammy to stop. Instead, she rested the damaged fiddle across her knees and placed one hand over the case. Her father had left her no room, no money, and no place in the business he had built. He had left her an instrument Chad called worthless, and now even that was cracked. But Michael had spent years making it. He had looked straight at her when he gave it to her. And before Sydney decided whether those things meant anything, she needed Jacob to tell her if the fiddle could still be saved. Tammy's spare room smelled faintly of lavender powder and cedar. The bed had a brass frame, and the dresser drawers stuck unless they were pulled with both hands. Sydney had slept there during winter storms when she was younger, back when Tammy's house felt like an extra room in her own life. Now she placed the fiddle case on the bed and lined her boxes against the wall. Tammy stood in the doorway. She was still wearing the green raincoat she had driven in. There's soup on the stove, she said. Chicken and rice. I'm not hungry. That's fine. It'll still be soup in an hour. Sydney sat on the edge of the bed. Tammy watched her for a moment. She had known Lauren before Lauren met Michael. She had remained close after the marriage, after Sydney was born, and after Lauren died. She knew when questions would help, and when they would only make a person defend, a pain they hadn't yet understood. Bathroom cabinet has clean towels, she said. The left faucet squeals. Don't let it scare you. Thank you. You can stay as long as you need. Sydney nodded. Tammy started down the hall, then turned back. Did you bring the fiddle? Sydney touched the case. Chad cracked it. Tammy returned to the room. How? He took it out while he was clearing my closet. Did he drop it? He says the case slid. That's not what I asked. Sydney looked up. I don't know. Tammy's jaw shifted. She wanted details, names, and something practical she could be angry about. Sydney didn't have the strength to provide any of them. Jacob can fix a crack, Tammy said. Maybe. Michael fixed worse. Michael's dead. The words came out flat. Tammy received them without stepping back. Yes, she said. He is. Sydney opened the case. Under the bedside lamp, the damage looked wider. One edge of the spruce had lifted slightly. A pale line showed where bare wood had been exposed beneath the varnish. Tammy did not touch it. That isn't a small crack, she said. Chad offered to pay. That's generous of him. Sydney heard the edge in her voice. I told him Jacob would look at it. Good. Isabella said I shouldn't involve him. Then definitely involve him. That almost made Sydney smile. Tammy went downstairs. Sydney remained beside the open case until the room grew cold. Then she closed it, washed her face, and ate soup at the kitchen table while Tammy worked a crossword puzzle without asking her to talk. The next morning, Sydney woke before 6. For several seconds, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the stacked boxes, the brass bed frame, and the fiddle case on the chair. Rain had stopped during the night. Water dripped from the gutters outside. She dressed, carried the case downstairs, and found Tammy measuring coffee into a paper filter. You want breakfast? Tammy asked. I'm going to the workshop. Today? If I wait, I'll keep thinking about it. Tammy set the scoop down. Want me to drive? I can walk. It's 3 miles. I know. Tammy looked at the case. I can drive. Sydney shook her head. She needed the distance. She needed an hour in which nobody could tell her what her father had intended, what Isabella needed, or what Chad hadn't meant to do. She walked north through Kent with the case in one hand. The morning was cool enough that her breath showed in the shade. Delivery trucks stood behind the grocery store. A man outside the coffee shop unfolded metal chairs and wiped rain from the seats. At the turn toward Studio Hill Road, Sydney slowed. The house appeared first between the trees. Its gray roof was wet and bright. Then she saw the workshop addition behind it, with the painted sign Michael had made when Jacob became a partner. Bowen and Hayes Violin Atelier. A moving truck stood in the driveway. Sydney left the road and followed the gravel path to the side entrance. She could hear tape tearing inside the house. Isabella had started earlier than planned. The workshop door was locked. Sydney still had her key. She held it against the lock, then stopped. Isabella owned Michael's controlling share now. Sydney didn't know whether her key still gave her a right to enter. Before she decided, the door opened. Jacob stood there with a cup of coffee. He wore an old blue shirt with the sleeves rolled above his elbows. You planning to pick that lock? He asked. I have a key. So, why are you staring at it? I wasn't sure I was allowed in. His expression changed. You're allowed in, he said. Sydney stepped past him. The workshop looked almost the same as it had before Michael died. That made the changes more obvious. His apron was gone from its hook. The medication bottles had been removed from the shelf. A white envelope with Isabella's handwriting sat on his bench. Jacob took the fiddle case from Sydney and placed it on a padded table. She left me a list, he said, nodding toward the envelope. A list of what? Inventory she wants completed. Equipment she believes belongs to the estate. Customer files she'd like moved into the house. Do they? Some, not all. Is she trying to make you leave? She hasn't said that. Would she? Jacob opened the case. Let's do one problem at a time. He lifted the fiddle and examined the crack beneath a bright lamp. Sydney stood across from him, watching his eyes move along the grain. How bad is it? She asked. Bad enough. Can you fix it? Yes. She let out the breath she had been holding. Jacob turned the instrument sideways. This didn't happen because a case slid off a shelf. Sydney looked at him. You're sure? A fall can crack a top. But see this mark near the lower edge? He showed her a shallow dent in the wood. Something struck it, he said. Or it struck something while it was out of the case. Chad said he was checking what it was. Did he say why? No. Jacob studied the dent again. He might have knocked it against the desk. I'm not accusing him of doing it on purpose. You don't have to protect him. I'm protecting what I know from what I don't. That was something Michael used to say when customers blamed humidity, careless musicians, baggage handlers, or ex-spouses for damaged instruments. Wood showed what had happened, Michael said. It did not show why. Jacob loosened the strings one at a time. Your father used hide glue, he said. That helps. I'll need to remove the top. Sydney moved closer. The whole top? If I close the crack from outside, it won't hold. I need to clean it, bring the edges together, and reinforce it underneath. How long? A week if nothing else is wrong. Do it. Jacob glanced up. You want to know the cost first? Yes. He named an amount lower than Sydney expected. That's not what you charge someone else. No, I can pay you. With what? She had some savings from weekend work at the grocery store. Not enough to live on for long, but enough for this. Tell me the real price. This is the real price. Jacob. He set down the peg he had removed. Your father and I own this shop together. He made the fiddle here. I already have the tools, the glue, and the time. Your time isn't free. No, but it's mine to give. Sydney looked toward Michael's empty bench. I don't want everyone deciding I'm helpless. I didn't say you were. Isabella says Tammy has to look after me. Chad says he's doing the work. Montgomery talks like I'll break if he uses a normal voice. Jacob waited. Sydney took out her wallet. I'll pay for materials now. I'll work off the rest. What work? Whatever needs doing. There's a lot that needs doing. Then it's a good arrangement. Jacob rubbed one hand over his chin. He understood that refusing her would make the repair feel like charity. He also had 2 customer instruments due, a lease disagreement beginning upstairs, and no assistance since Michael's illness had worsened. Help would be useful, though Sydney had never worked a full day at a repair bench. "Fine," he said. "You clean the back shelves and update the intake cards. You do exactly what I tell you around open instruments. Fine. And you don't touch varnish. I know. Michael let you touch varnish. Once. Once was enough." Sydney took off her coat. That was her first decision since the will reading that felt like her own. She would not put the fiddle in a closet and wait for someone else to decide its value. She would stay while Jacob opened it. She would see what Chad's carelessness had done, and she would help put back what could be put back. Jacob cleared a space at the center bench. Removing the top was slow work. He warmed a thin opening knife and worked it into the seam near the chin rest. Sydney held a lamp where he directed. Each time the old glue released, there was a quiet sound like paper lifting from glass. "Your father closed this tighter than usual," Jacob said. "Is that bad?" "Not bad, just careful." Was he hiding mistakes? Michael advertised his mistakes. He said it kept customers' expectations sensible. Sydney shifted the lamp. "Did you know he was leaving me only this?" Jacob's knife stopped. "No." "Did he ever talk about his will?" "Not with me." "He talked about everything with you." "Not everything." "Did you know he was giving Isabella the business?" "I knew he wanted her financially secure. I knew he didn't want the workshop sold immediately. That's not what I asked." "No, I didn't know." Sydney watched his face. Jacob wasn't good at easy lies. His eyes moved away before his voice did. This time, he looked straight at her. "Would you have stopped him?" she asked. "I would have asked what he thought he was doing. He was sick. Maybe he wasn't thinking clearly. Anthony wouldn't have let him sign if he wasn't. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true." The last section of glue released. Jacob laid down the opening knife and flexed his fingers. "Ready?" he asked. Sydney nodded. He lifted the top plate less than an inch, then stopped. "What?" she said. "Nothing yet. The crack runs under the fingerboard. I don't want to open it farther than it can move." He adjusted the support beneath the neck. With one hand on the edge, he raised the plate slowly. The inside of a violin was not empty in the way Sydney expected. The curved ribs held shadows. A narrow bass bar ran along one side. The air smelled of dry wood and old glue, though the fiddle was new. Jacob leaned closer. "This lining is unusual?" "What lining?" He pointed inside near the upper block, where the neck joined the body. A narrow strip of spruce had been fitted behind the block. It looked almost like part of the structure, but its grain ran in the wrong direction. "Does it need fixing?" Sydney asked. "It shouldn't be there." "Could it be reinforcement?" "Not like that." He set the top plate on a padded cradle and turned the body toward the light. The added strip had been cut cleanly and sealed at both ends. Sydney remembered the mark she had noticed through the sound hole in February. Did Dad put it there? He must have. Why? Jacob did not answer. He picked up a small dental mirror and angled it behind the neck block. "There's a gap," he said. "A crack, a space." He changed the angle of the mirror. Sydney watched his expression become still. "What do you see?" "Paper." She thought she had misheard him. "Inside the fiddle, behind the neck block, could it be a label?" "No." Jacob placed the mirror down. He reached for a narrow blade, then hesitated. "If I open this strip, I may not get it back exactly as Michael built it." Sydney looked into the body. She could see only darkness beyond the block. Why would he put paper in there? "I don't know. Did makers do that? Some hide notes or signatures beneath a top, not usually behind a false strip. Could it be part of the repair record? The fiddle didn't have a repair record. They stood without speaking. From the house came a heavy thump, followed by the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Sydney thought of Chad emptying her room. She thought of the will and of Michael's one unexplained sentence. "Everything you need is already yours." "Open it," she said. Jacob looked at her. "You're sure? He made it for me. Whatever's in there, he put it there before he gave it to me." Jacob selected a smaller blade. He worked one corner loose, then another. The strip came away without splintering. Behind it was a narrow cavity cut into the block. A folded piece of paper rested inside. Jacob turned the fiddle so the opening faced Sydney. "You should take it out," he said. Her fingers would not fit. He handed her a pair of blunt tweezers. Sydney caught one edge and pulled slowly. The paper resisted at first, then slid free. It was folded several times into a strip no wider than her thumb. One side had darkened where the wood touched it. She set it on Michael's bench. Jacob stood beside her, close enough to read, but not reaching for it. Sydney unfolded the first crease, then the second. Her father's handwriting appeared in black ink. She recognized the small upright letters, the long tail on his Y, and the way he pressed too hard at the end of every line. Sydney, Lot 14, Bullsbridge Road. Ask Tammy about the mill. Everything you need is already yours. Dad, Sydney read it twice. Then she read it aloud, because the words made less sense in silence. Jacob pulled a stool toward her. Sit down. I don't need to sit. You're gripping the bench. She released it. What mill? She asked. I don't know. Bullsbridge Road has houses. There's the covered bridge, the river, trails, and old properties. Do you know Lot 14? No. You worked with him for 23 years. I know. He must have told you. He didn't. Jacob picked up the removed strip and examined it. His surprise had passed. Now he was studying the construction with the focused anger of a man discovering that someone he trusted had kept a careful secret. This was built into the Fiddle from the start, he said. How can you tell? The cavity was cut before the neck was set. He couldn't have done it afterward without removing the top and leaving signs. There aren't any. Sydney did the count in her head. Michael had begun the Fiddle years before he became sick. So this wasn't something he did because he knew he was dying. No. Then he planned it. Yes. The moving truck's engine started outside. A moment later, footsteps crossed the gravel. Isabella appeared at the workshop door. She looked from Sydney to Jacob, then to the open Fiddle on the bench. I didn't know you were here, she said. I brought the Fiddle for repair. So I see. Her attention settled on the folded paper beneath Sydney's hand. What's that? Sydney did not answer at once. Isabella stepped into the room. Did you find something inside it? Jacob looked at Sydney. He would not lie for her, but he would let her choose what belonged to her. Sydney folded the note along its original creases. It's a note from Dad. What does it say? Sydney slipped it into her coat pocket. He said the Fiddle could be repaired. It was not an answer, and Isabella knew it. Her eyes moved to the opened cavity behind the neck block. May I see the note? No. The words surprised all three of them. Isabella's face cooled. Sydney, I'm not trying to take it from you. It was inside the one thing he left me. I understand that. Then you understand why it's mine. For a moment, Isabella looked as if she might insist. Then the movers called to her from the driveway. We'll discuss this later, she said. Sydney waited until the door closed behind her. Jacob lowered his voice. She saw the cavity. I know. She'll ask again. I know. What do you want to do? Sydney touched the note through her pocket. She had no idea what Lot 14 was, or why Michael had hidden the address inside a Fiddle he began making years earlier. She only knew the note had been concealed on purpose, and Isabella had wanted it the moment she saw it. Finish opening the crack, Sydney said. I'll clean the back shelves, and after that, Sydney looked toward the road beyond the workshop windows. After that, I'm asking Tammy about the mill. Tammy was carrying a basket of laundry down the hall when Sydney returned. She took one look at Sydney's face and set the basket on the floor. What happened? Sydney removed the note from her pocket. Dad hid this inside the Fiddle. Tammy's hand remained on the basket handle. Inside it, where? Behind the neck block. Jacob had to remove the top. Sydney unfolded the paper and held it out. Tammy did not take it. Her eyes found the second line. She read the rest without moving her lips, then lowered herself into the chair by the hall table. You know what it means, Sydney said. Tammy looked toward the kitchen. Let's sit down. We are sitting down. You aren't. Sydney remained standing. Tell me what the mill is. Tammy pressed both hands against her knees. She looked older than she had that morning, though only a few hours had passed. I promised Michael I wouldn't speak about it unless he told me to. He told you to. Yes. Then speak. Tammy nodded once. There's an old grist mill off Bullsbridge Road. Your father bought it a long time ago. Sydney waited for the sentence to correct itself. My father owned a mill? He said he did. When? 2003. That was before I was born. Yes. Before Jacob started at the workshop. the same year, I think. Why have I never seen it? Because Michael kept it quiet. From everyone? From almost everyone. Sydney walked past Tammy into the kitchen. Her coat felt too warm, but she did not remove it. She placed the note on the table and sat across from the empty chair. Tammy followed more slowly. Did Mom know? Sydney asked. Yes. Did Isabella? Not from me. That isn't what I asked. I don't know what Michael told Isabella. Jacob didn't know. Tammy sat opposite her. Michael kept different parts of his life in separate boxes. He always had. That sounds nicer than saying he lied. It might be. Sydney looked at the note. Why did he buy it? At first he said he needed space. For what? He didn't say. The workshop was smaller then. He stored wood wherever he could. Your mother had maple under the guest bed for nearly a year, so it was for the business. Maybe in the beginning, maybe. Tammy took off her glasses and cleaned them with the edge of her shirt. Sydney recognized the delay. Tammy was deciding how much truth another person could stand, and Sydney did not want the truth portioned out. What aren't you telling me? Tammy put her glasses back on. Your mother knew she was dying before you understood how serious it was. Sydney's hands went still. She remembered hospital corridors, meals left untouched, and adults lowering their voices when she entered rooms. She remembered Lauren wearing a soft blue cap at the kitchen table. Her memories did not arrive in order anymore. I understood, Sydney said. You understood she was ill. That isn't the same. What does Mom dying have to do with a mill Dad bought years earlier? A few days before she died, she asked Michael and me to come to the hospital. She wanted to talk when you weren't there. Sydney pushed her chair back slightly. Tammy continued before she could stop her. Lauren worried about what would happen after she was gone. Not the next week, years later. She knew Michael might marry again. He did. Yes. She knew Isabella. No. This was 3 years before he met her. What was she worried about? You. Sydney looked away. The refrigerator motor started. Tammy's wall clock clicked above the sink. They were ordinary sounds, and that made the conversation harder. Tammy folded her hands. Lauren said, families change when someone dies. Money moves. Houses get sold. People make new promises because they have to keep living. She wasn't accusing anyone who might come later. She simply knew she wouldn't be here to protect your place. Sydney's voice came out low. So she made Dad promise. They promised each other. Whichever one survived would leave you something whole. Something that couldn't be absorbed into another marriage or divided with another family. Sydney looked at Tammy again. You heard them say that? I did. What exactly did Dad say? He said, she'll have a place that is hers. Nobody will be able to vote her out of it or make her ask permission. Tammy remembered the hospital room clearly. Lauren had been 39 and Michael had been 43. He had stood beside the window because he could not sit still. Tammy had held Lauren's hand while they talked. None of them had known what Sydney's future would look like. They only knew Lauren would not be in it. Why didn't you ever tell me? Sydney asked. It wasn't my promise to explain. It was about me. It was. And when the will left me nothing, you still said nothing. Tammy's face tightened. I didn't know what Michael had done. I knew about the mill. I knew he kept working on it. I did not know whether he still owned it, or whether he had sold it, or whether it was worth anything. You knew he'd promised me a place. Yes. You sat in your car while I moved out of his house. I was waiting for him to keep his word. He was dead. And then you brought home a note he hid inside your fiddle. Sydney stood and went to the window. A row of small clay pots sat on the sill, each holding a kitchen herb Tammy had kept alive through winter. Sydney touched one of the basil leaves without picking it. Did you help him with the mill? She asked. Sometimes. What did you do? Carried supplies, held ladders, told him when his ideas were foolish. What kind of supplies? Roofing nails, cleaning rags? Food. He spent weekends there after Lauren died. Did I go? No. Why not? I asked him that once. He said it had to be finished before it could become yours. Is it finished? Tammy considered that. The outside was sound the last time I saw it. The inside was mostly empty. When was that? About 6 years ago. You haven't been back since? Michael stopped asking for help. Sydney turned from the window. Do you have a key? Tammy's eyes moved toward a drawer beside the pantry. That was answer enough. She opened it and removed a metal ring from beneath a stack of takeout menus. 2 keys hung from it. One was long and dark with age. The other was a newer brass key. He gave me these in case something happened, Tammy said. Something did. I know. Sydney reached for the ring. Tammy closed her hand around it. Not alone. I'll take Jacob. Tomorrow, in daylight. It's barely afternoon. And you've had enough dropped on you for one day. Sydney looked at Tammy's closed fist. What if Isabella knows? Then waiting one night won't change that. You don't know. No, I don't. Tammy's voice had sharpened. She had spent 15 years carrying one piece of a promise and no authority to complete it. Now Sydney wanted every missing answer before supper, and Tammy understood why. She also knew the mill sat near a river on an isolated stretch of road. Being urgent did not make it safe. Call Jacob, Tammy said. Tell him where we're going. We'll leave after breakfast. Sydney sent him a photograph of the note. He called less than a minute later. You asked her? She knows the mill. There was silence. How much does she know? He asked. She says Dad bought it in 2003. Bought it how? She doesn't know. Whose name is on it? She doesn't know that either. Jacob exhaled. I'll check the town records. Tonight, now. Tammy has keys. We're going in the morning. You too. I have a customer coming at 9. Then come after. Sydney, finding a note doesn't mean we're allowed to enter private property. It was my father's. Maybe. Tammy said he owned it. We need to know who owns it now. She has keys. That means she has keys. Sydney disliked his caution because it slowed her down. She also knew he was right. What if the record says Isabella owns it? Then we don't go inside, and we hand her the note? I didn't say that. Call me when you know. Jacob called back shortly before the town office closed. Lot 14 exists, he said. It's just over 4 acres near the Housatonic. And the owner? That's the complication. What complication? The public record doesn't list Michael. Then Tammy's wrong? I don't think so. The owner is recorded as 14 Bullsbridge Holding Trust. Sydney leaned against the kitchen counter. Who owns the trust? The clerk couldn't tell me. She said the record shows the trust name and a mailing address through an attorney's office. Whose office? She wouldn't give that over the phone. Could it be Dad's? A trust isn't a person. It holds property for someone or for some purpose. So it might be mine. It might belong to anyone. Sydney looked at Michael's note on the table. He named the lot. Yes. He told me to ask Tammy. Yes. That's enough for me. It's enough to investigate. It isn't enough to assume you own it. She heard paper moving on his end. Did the clerk say anything else? The building is listed as a former grist mill. No sale since 2003. So, Dad didn't sell it. Not in an ordinary sale. Will you come tomorrow? I'll meet you there at 10. Tammy drove. Sydney sat in front with the Fiddle note folded inside an envelope on her lap. The key ring rested in the cup holder. Bullsbridge Road narrowed as it followed the river. Trees crowded close to the shoulders. Tammy slowed near a gravel turnout that looked more like an entrance to a hiking path than a driveway. There, she said. 2 stone posts stood beneath vines. A rusted chain lay open between them. Tammy turned onto the track. Branches brushed the station wagon. The road curved downhill, and the mill appeared beyond a stand of bare maples. Sydney had expected a ruin. The building was old, but it was standing straight. Gray boards covered the upper story. The foundation was made of thick fieldstone, darkened by river spray. A steep roof rose above the trees, patched in places but unbroken. The mill wheel remained on the far side, though weeds and fallen limbs crowded its lower edge. Jacob's truck was already parked beside the building. He stepped out as Tammy stopped. You came early? Sydney said. You came earlier. Sydney looked at the mill. Does this seem mostly empty to you? Tammy followed her gaze. It looks different. How? The siding was red. Half the windows were gone. Michael must have kept working after I stopped coming. They walked around the building. A narrow porch ran along the roadside. One railing had pulled loose. Moss covered the bottom steps. There were no signs, no mailbox, and no visible utility meter. Jacob tested the porch with one boot before putting his weight on it. Roof's newer than 6 years, he said. Maybe 4 or 5. Dad was sick last year, Sydney said. He could have had someone do it. Wouldn't you have known? I thought I would have known about the whole building. The brass key fit the front lock. Tammy turned it, but the door moved only an inch before stopping. Something's behind it, Jacob said. He put his shoulder against the wood. The The door scraped across the floor, pushing a fallen length of ceiling trim aside. Cold air came through the opening. Inside, dust lay over wide plank floors. The main room rose through both stories, crossed by heavy beams. Old iron gears remained near the river wall. Fresh water stains ran beneath one window where a pane had broken. The place was not finished. It was also not abandoned. A work table stood near the back with folded drop cloths beneath it. Shelves held sealed jars, hand tools, and labeled boxes of screws. A broom leaned against the wall. Its bristles had not yet gone gray with dust. Jacob touched the work table. Someone's been here within the last year. Sydney walked farther inside. Her footsteps echoed. On one wall, new studs had been built against the old stone. Most were covered with plain boards. One section remained open, showing yellow insulation and carefully run electrical cable. "Is the power on?" she asked. Jacob found a breaker panel. "Main is off." Tammy stood just inside the doorway. "Michael used lanterns when I came." A gust entered through the broken window. Papers shifted on a shelf. Rain from the previous night had darkened the floor beneath it. Sydney crossed to the window. "We need to cover this." Jacob came beside her. He pressed a finger into the sill and examined the wood. "Before the next rain." "There's plywood near the work table. That sheet's too narrow. I saw more under the porch." Jacob looked at her. "We came to inspect, not repair. If we leave it open, the floor gets worse. We also don't know whether we have permission to alter anything. My father told me to come here. He told you to ask Tammy." Sydney took the note from its envelope and opened it on the sill. "He named this lot. Why build a cavity into a fiddle if he only wanted me to ask about an old building?" Jacob had no answer. A wooden shutter banged somewhere on the riverside. Tammy called from the main room. "You both should see this." Near the old gearing, someone had cleared a narrow path through years of stored lumber. It ended at a low interior door. The dark key fit that lock. Tammy opened it. The small room beyond held a cot, a kettle, and a row of metal cabinets. Michael's brown work jacket hung from a nail. Sydney recognized a repair in the left sleeve. She had sewn it badly the previous winter, and he had worn it anyway. She took the jacket down. In one pocket she found 2 peppermint wrappers, a pencil worn flat on one side, and a receipt from a Kent hardware store dated the previous November. "He was here after his diagnosis," she said. Jacob read the date. "He was here after he stopped driving," he said. Sydney looked at Tammy. "I didn't bring him," Tammy said. Jacob folded the receipt and returned it to the pocket. "Someone did." "Isabella?" "I don't know." "Chad?" "I don't know." The same answer now carried more weight. Michael had continued coming to the mill during the months when Sydney believed every part of his life had narrowed to the house, the workshop, and hospital visits. She put on his jacket. The sleeves covered part of her hands. Outside, clouds had begun collecting above the river. "We cover the window," Sydney said. Jacob looked toward the ceiling. "Then we secure the porch railing and check the roof runoff." "You said we weren't repairing." "I changed my mind. They found a wider sheet of plywood beneath a canvas tarp." Jacob measured the window. Sydney held the board while he cut it. Tammy swept broken glass into a metal dustpan and carried it outside. It was small work against a large building. Still, by noon, the rain opening was sealed. Sydney stood in the main room and listened to the river moving behind the stone wall. Her father had hidden a note. He had hidden a property. He had come here while he was dying and told no one close to him where he was going. Whatever he had meant Sydney to find, the building was now asking for more than curiosity. It needed someone to stay long enough to notice what he had done. Sydney stayed through the afternoon. Jacob drove back to Studio Hill Road for his customer appointment. Tammy went into town for sandwiches, work gloves, and a roll of heavy trash bags. She left the keys with Sydney, but made her promise not to climb the old mill ladder alone. Sydney agreed. Then she spent 20 minutes looking up at the ladder. It rose from the main floor to a narrow gallery near the roof. The lower rungs were solid, but the upper section disappeared behind a beam. From below, she could see a long workbench and several covered shapes. She did not climb. Instead, she swept around the gearing. Dust rose in pale clouds. Beneath it, she found chalk marks on the floor. They formed short lines and measurements beside the newer wall. One number had been circled. Sydney crouched and rubbed the chalk with her thumb. It had faded, but it had not been there for decades. Her father had made those marks recently enough that part of them remained. Tammy returned carrying paper bags. "You climbed the ladder," she said. "No." "You thought about it?" "Yes." "At least you're honest when there's evidence." They ate turkey sandwiches on the porch. The river moved beyond the trees, high from the spring rain. Tammy kept glancing at the building as if trying to fit it over an older memory. "Was that wall here when you came before?" Sydney asked. "Which one?" "The boarded wall beside the gears." Tammy leaned to see through the doorway. "I don't remember boards." "It was stone all the way across. Jacob said the wiring was newer. Michael talked about putting in heat." "Did he?" "Not while I was helping." Sydney folded the sandwich paper into smaller and smaller squares. "Did Mom ever come here?" "Twice that I know of." "Why?" "The first time, she wanted to see what Michael had bought. She said he had lost his mind." "That sounds like her." "The second time was after you were born. They walked around outside. I waited in the car." "Did they argue?" "I couldn't hear them. You usually know when people are arguing. They weren't waving their arms." Sydney smiled slightly. Lauren had waved her arms when she was excited, angry, or explaining how to reach a place she had only visited once. "What did she say afterward?" Sydney asked. "She said Michael finally understood what the place was for." "And you didn't ask what she meant?" "I did. She said it wasn't ready." The answer irritated Sydney because it matched Michael's answer years later. The mill had to be finished before it became hers. No one had explained what finished meant. After lunch, Tammy held the ladder while Sydney climbed. The gallery boards creaked but held. From there, Sydney could see the mill's full interior. The new wall ended several feet below the roof beams, though from the ground, it had looked as if it reached the ceiling. That was strange. She moved along the gallery, keeping one hand on the railing. The covered shapes were cabinets and wooden forms. One tarp protected a bending iron, clamps, and a small electric hot plate. "Violin tools," Sydney called down. "Your father's?" Tammy asked. "I think so." The workbench had a shallow groove worn along its front edge. Michael's bench at Studio Hill Road had the same mark where he braced his forearms. Sydney opened the first drawer. It held chalk, spare blades, and 2 sharpening stones. The second contained paper templates for violin tops. Several were labeled with dates and initials Sydney did not recognize. The lowest drawer stuck. She pulled harder. It opened an inch, then stopped against something inside. She reached through the gap and moved a thin wooden box that had fallen sideways. The drawer slid free. Inside were receipts bundled with twine. Most came from lumber suppliers, tool dealers, and a company that installed environmental controls. The dates covered more than 20 years. Sydney carried them downstairs. Tammy read the name on one invoice. That company did museum storage rooms. "How do you know?" "They worked on the Historical Society building. The invoice listed insulated wall panels, humidity equipment, and a secure steel interior door. The price had been paid in full nearly 8 years earlier." Sydney looked toward the boarded wall. "That room isn't heated," she said. "No, there's no equipment in it, not that we've seen." When Jacob returned, he found them spreading receipts across the work table. He picked up the environmental control invoice. This wasn't for the main room. "We know," Sydney said. He read it twice. "Did you find a separate mechanical unit?" "No." "Duct work?" "Nothing." Sydney showed him the wall from the gallery. "It stops below the roof." Jacob climbed the ladder to check. He walked the full length of the upper platform, then leaned over the railing. "There should be framing visible behind it," he said. "There isn't?" "What does that mean?" "It means there may be another wall." They cleared the lumber from the chalked area. Several boards had been stacked upright against the paneling. Beneath them, the floor was cleaner. Jacob tapped the first board with his knuckles. The sound was firm. He moved 3 feet to the right and tapped again. The second sound was hollow. Sydney and Tammy looked at each other. Jacob tapped farther along. The hollow space continued for nearly 12 feet. "There's a room behind this," he said. "How do we get in?" Sydney asked. "We look before we break anything." He ran his fingers along each seam. The boards had been fitted tightly. Their nail heads were plugged with matching wood, making the whole section look permanent. Near the floor, one plank had a fine cut across its width. Jacob pressed it. Nothing happened. Sydney knelt beside him. The chalk circle was here. She traced the faded mark. It ended near a dark knot in the wood. Jacob pushed the knot with his thumb. A hidden latch clicked. The narrow plank released at one end. Jacob pulled it forward, revealing a recessed iron handle. Tammy let out a slow breath. He always did enjoy making simple things difficult. Jacob gripped the handle and pulled. A section of wall opened toward them. It was a door, wide enough for one person, balanced on concealed hinges. Cool, dry air came through the gap. The space beyond was not large. Smooth insulated panels covered its walls and ceiling. A compact humidity unit stood in one corner, silent because the power was off. Empty instrument racks lined both sides. Sydney stepped inside. "Empty," she said. Jacob examined the racks. Each had felt-lined supports shaped for violin cases. Not always? How many? Maybe 40. Sydney counted the spaces. Some were narrow, others were built for larger cases. At the far end stood a dark metal cabinet bolted to the floor. It was waist-high, with a thick door and a small keyhole. Jacob tried the brass key and then the dark one. Neither fit. Tammy walked along the racks. Why would Michael build this and leave it empty? He may have moved whatever was here, Jacob said. Where? Sydney asked. I don't know. The answer was beginning to feel less like caution and more like a wall of its own. Sydney examined the cabinet. Fine scratches surrounded the keyhole. Her father had opened it often. Could we drill the lock? We could, Jacob said. We aren't going to? Why? Because if there are papers inside, metal shavings and a drill bit aren't how we meet them. You open the fiddle, because we had to repair it. This cabinet isn't cracked. Tammy ran her hand over one empty rack. A small brass plate had been screwed beneath it. The plate bore a number and 3 letters. Do these mean anything? She asked. Jacob bent closer. Inventory code, probably. Sydney checked the other racks. Each had a plate. The numbers did not run in order. Maybe the receipts match, she said. They carried the papers into the hidden room and checked dates, amounts, and handwritten notes. None matched the brass labels. Jacob had to leave again before 6. Isabella wanted a full count of workshop tools by morning, and 2 customer instruments still needed estimates. Lock this door when you go, he told Sydney. We haven't found the cabinet key. Then leave the cabinet alone. Sydney gave him a look. I mean it. I heard you. Jacob looked at Tammy. She heard you, Tammy said. That isn't the same as agreeing. After his truck left, they searched without forcing anything. They checked the workbench drawers again. They looked under shelves, inside the kettle, behind the breaker panel, and along the beams nearest the hidden wall. Sydney found nothing in Michael's jacket except what she had already seen. Tammy sat on the cot and rubbed her knee. He wouldn't hide a key far from the lock, she said. He hid the address miles away inside a fiddle. That was for you. A key was for him. Sydney stood in the small room and tried to imagine Michael arriving alone. He would hang his jacket on the nail. He would set down whatever he carried. He would make tea if his stomach allowed it. Then he would go to the hidden room. Michael hated carrying keys. At Studio Hill Road, he kept the workshop key above the side door, inside a wooden box shaped like a violin plane. Sydney looked toward the gallery. She climbed the ladder again. On the upper workbench, 3 small planes sat beside the sharpening stones. 2 were real tools. The third was wider, with a decorative maple cap. She lifted it. The bottom slid aside. A small steel key lay inside. Of course, Tammy said when Sydney brought it down. He never changed. The key entered the cabinet lock smoothly. Sydney stopped before turning it. Jacob had told her not to force the cabinet. She had not forced anything. Still, she knew he expected her to wait. Tammy understood the hesitation. You can call him, she said. He'll say wait until morning. Probably. Do you think I should? I think whatever is in there has waited a long time already. That sounds like yes. It sounds like you're 18, and it's your decision. Sydney turned the key. The lock released with a heavy click. Inside, a leather-bound ledger stood upright beside a flat wooden document box. A cotton bag held several sealed envelopes. There was no money, no deed, and no key to another room. Sydney took out the ledger first. Michael Bowen was written inside the cover. Below his name were the words, Private Restoration Record. The first entry was dated in 2003. Each page listed an instrument, its known maker, condition, purchase source, restoration work, and location code. Some names meant nothing to Sydney. Others she recognized from conversations at the workshop. Galliano, Vuillaume, Guarneri School, Early American makers whose work Jacob had once told her belonged in collections, not closets. Sydney turned pages faster. The entries continued across years. Beside several were notes in Michael's handwriting, recovered from closed estate, not for resale, held pending rightful placement, Lauren approved. The later pages contained photographs. Each instrument had been pictured from the front, back, sides, scroll, and interior label. Jacob had said the hidden room held perhaps 40 cases. The ledger listed 37 instruments. Tammy touched one photograph. Were these here? The location codes matched the rack plates. Then where are they now? Sydney looked at the empty supports around them. She opened the flat wooden box. A folded sheet lay on top. Her name was written across it. Beneath that was a sealed letter and a card bearing Anthony Montgomery's office address. Sydney unfolded the sheet. If you found this, you opened the fiddle and followed it here. Take the fiddle, my first note, and this ledger to Anthony Montgomery. Do not give him copies. Bring the originals. He will tell you what I could not put in the will. The maker's mark is inside the fiddle. Evan Jennings knows my work well enough to read it. Trust Jacob, but let him choose how much trouble he is willing to stand in. The sealed letter is for you after Anthony confirms the mark. Dad Sydney read the line about the will again. This was not a forgotten property Michael had failed to mention. It was not an old workshop he had meant to clean out someday. He had kept it out of the will on purpose. He had also expected someone to challenge what came next. Tammy lifted the sealed letter from the box. It was thick enough to hold several pages. You're not supposed to open this yet, she said. I can read. I know you can. Sydney put the letter back. At the bottom of the box lay a recent photograph. It showed the hidden room filled with instrument cases. Michael stood in the center wearing the brown work jacket. The date printed on the back was from the previous September. The collection had been there when his illness was diagnosed. Now every rack was empty. Sydney turned the photograph over again, as if another answer might appear. Tammy looked around the bare room. Somebody moved them, she said. Sydney closed the ledger. And whoever did it may know exactly what Dad was trying to leave me. Tammy locked the cabinet and put the steel key in her purse. You're not keeping that beside the takeout menus, Sydney said. I've learned. They carried the ledger and document box to the station wagon. Sydney held them on her lap for the drive back, just as she had held the fiddle. Every turn felt sharper with Michael's records resting beneath her hands. At Tammy's kitchen table, she called Montgomery's office. His assistant answered first. When Sydney said Lot 14, the woman asked her to hold. Montgomery came on the line himself. Where did you hear that description? My father wrote it in a note. Another careful pause followed. What kind of note? One hidden inside the fiddle. Do you have the instrument? Jacob's repairing it. Do you have the note? Yes. Keep it with you. Don't mail it, photograph it for anyone, or leave it at the workshop. Sydney looked at the photograph she had already sent Jacob. Why? We need to speak in person. I found a ledger too. Montgomery's chair creaked at the other end of the line. Michael's restoration ledger? That's what it says. Bring that as well. Do you know about the trust? I know about several arrangements your father made. That isn't an answer. It's the answer I can give until I examine what you found. Sydney pressed her thumb against the edge of the table. There are 37 instruments listed. The room where they were stored is empty. Did you remove anything from the property besides the papers? No. Did anyone else? Not while we were there. Who has seen the ledger? Tammy and Jacob. Anyone in your family? No. He offered her an appointment for the following afternoon. Bring the fiddle if the top is still open, he said. Mr. Hayes may come, but the decision is yours. Isabella owns Dad's part of the workshop. Does she have a right to the ledger? I can't answer that before I see it. You already know more than you're saying. Yes, Montgomery said. I do. The honesty stopped her. Why didn't you say anything at the will reading? Because the will was not the document that governed Lot 14. Sydney sat straighter. Then what does? We'll discuss it tomorrow. After the call, she returned to the mill with Tammy. Jacob met them there after closing the workshop early. He read Michael's second note beside the open cabinet. When he reached the line about choosing how much trouble he was willing to stand in, he made a tired sound through his nose. He knew exactly how annoying this would be, Jacob said. Are you willing, Sydney asked, to stand in trouble? To help me. I'm here. That isn't the same answer. Jacob folded the note. Isabella asked whether I knew what you found inside the fiddle. I told her it was private. And? She reminded me that she controls Michael's share of the business. What did you say? That partnership rights don't include reading his daughter's mail. Sydney looked down. You could lose the workshop. She can't remove my tools, my lease interest, or my ownership share. She can make working there miserable. That's what Dad meant. Probably. You still haven't answered. Jacob placed the note back in its box. Yes, I'm willing. Sydney handed him the ledger. He studied the first pages slowly. Several times, he brought a photograph closer to the light. Do you recognize them? She asked. Some. Did you work on them? No. Are you sure? I'd remember this. He pointed to a violin described as Italian, made in Naples more than 2 centuries earlier. The restoration notes filled 3 pages. This kind of work takes months, he said. Michael couldn't have done it at Studio Hill without me seeing it. He worked here. At night, on weekends, he found time. Jacob turned more pages. This explains the wood. What wood? Old pieces disappeared from his private stock. Not often. A rib here, spruce for an edge repair, maple for a replacement corner. He said he'd sold them to another maker. He lied. Yes. Why keep instruments off the workshop books? That's what worries me. Sydney looked around the hidden room. Could Isabella claim they belonged to the business? If company money bought them, maybe. If customer property was brought here, absolutely. But Michael writes that he purchased most himself. Can his handwriting prove that? It proves what he recorded. We need receipts and ownership histories. The ledger listed sources, but not always prices. Some instruments had come from estates. Others had been damaged, disputed, or nearly discarded. Jacob reached the last entry. A location code appeared beside each one, but the date-out column was blank. If he moved them, Sydney said, wouldn't he write where? He wrote everything else, so they might still be here. They searched the hidden room again. Jacob measured its exterior wall, then compared it with the distance inside. The measurements differed by nearly 4 feet. There's another space behind the racks, he said. Sydney checked each rack for a latch. They found none. At the far end, Jacob held his ear near the insulated panel. A low hum came from beyond it, too faint to hear from the doorway. The humidity unit is off, he said. Tammy listened. Then what's running? Jacob followed the sound to a metal strip near the floor. Backup power, maybe. Can you open it? Sydney asked, not without knowing what the locking system is. So, we wait for Montgomery. We wait one night. They left the room sealed and locked the mill. When they returned to Tammy's house, Isabella's car was parked at the curb. She sat in the kitchen with a grocery bag beside her chair. Tammy had let her in, but had not offered coffee. I brought some of Sydney's things, Isabella said. The bag contained a pair of shoes, mail, and the blue sweater Sydney had left across her desk chair. Everything was neatly folded. Thank you, Sydney said. We need to talk. Tammy reached for her purse. I can go into the other room. You can stay, Sydney said. Isabella looked at the document box in Sydney's hands. So, there was more. Sydney placed it beside her chair. More what? Inside the fiddle. You asked me that yesterday. And you avoided answering. It was Dad's note to me. About Bullsbridge Road? Sydney's eyes moved to Tammy. I didn't tell her, Tammy said. Isabella removed her gloves 1 finger at a time. Chad knows someone in the assessor's office. Jacob called asking about Lot 14. Kent isn't a large place. What did his friend tell him? That Michael may have held land through a trust. May have? The records are unclear. They're clear enough to show you don't own it. Isabella's mouth tightened. This is exactly the kind of conversation I hoped we could avoid. What kind? One where you assume I'm trying to steal from you. You inherited my home and Dad's business. Now you're waiting in Tammy's kitchen because I found something else. I inherited what Michael left me. So did I. Isabella looked at the box again. If the land was purchased with workshop money, it may belong to the business. If Michael hid instruments or customer property there, I'm responsible for that. You didn't know the place existed yesterday. I know now. And now you're responsible? I control a business with Michael's name on the door. Customers trust that name. Banks trust our records. If he kept assets off the books, that affects me and Jacob. It affects me, too. You're 18, Sydney. You're grieving, living out of boxes, and following notes hidden in damaged instruments. I'm asking you to come home so we can handle this together. Handle it how? Give me copies of what you found. Let me speak with Anthony. We'll sort out what belongs where. And if the mill belongs to me, then we'll discuss what makes sense. It would make sense for me to keep it. You haven't seen tax bills, insurance costs, or repair estimates. You haven't either. Isabella's patience slipped. You think owning an old building proves Michael loved you more than the will suggested. It doesn't. Property is paperwork and expense. Sydney put both hands around the document box. Then, why do you care so much? For the first time, Isabella answered without arranging the words. Because I will not have people saying Michael hid half his life from me. The kitchen went still. There it was. Not hunger for the old mill itself. Isabella wanted control of the story surrounding it. She had spent 12 years presenting the Bowen household and atelier as stable, respectable, and properly managed. A secret property, hidden records, and a daughter sent away with the only clue made her look less like Michael's trusted widow and more like someone who had never known him fully. She picked up her gloves. "Come home," she said. "We can keep this private. I'm staying here." Isabella stood. "Then at least don't sign anything tomorrow." "How do you know I'm seeing Anthony? You just asked why I was here. This is why. I can see where this is going, even if you can't." She left without taking back the grocery bag. Chad arrived the next morning before Sydney's appointment. He waited beside Tammy's station wagon, hands in his jacket pockets. "My mother doesn't know I'm here," he said. "That makes one of us. I want to make you an offer." "On what?" "Whatever claim you have to the Bulls Bridge property." Sydney stared at him. "You don't know whether I have one. Neither do you." "Then why offer?" "Because the lot alone could be worth a few $100,000, maybe more with river access." "And you thought I wouldn't learn that?" "I thought you might prefer cash now." He named $40,000. Sydney almost laughed. "You inherited cash last month. Some. And now you want to give it to me? I can arrange it." "What does arrange mean?" Chad looked toward Tammy's front window. "I have someone willing to help if the land transfers cleanly. A buyer, an investor. How much will they pay you? That isn't your concern. It is if you're buying something from me." He took one hand from his pocket and rubbed the back of his neck. The calm older brother manner was gone. "I owe $20,000, he said. "It's due within 60 days of the will reading." "To whom?" "A private lender." "What did you borrow it for?" "A business idea that didn't work." "What business?" "It doesn't matter. It matters if you're trying to use Dad's hidden property to fix it." Chad looked away. The inheritance had not freed him. It had only covered part of what he had already spent. He needed a larger asset he could turn quickly, and the mill had appeared at exactly the moment desperation made him careless. "Take the 40, he said. "You can rent a place, pay for school, do whatever you want. An old mill is going to eat money. No. You haven't even thought about it. I have now." His face hardened. "Mom can contest this. Then she can tell Anthony why." Chad stepped closer. "You think a note inside a fiddle makes you untouchable?" "No." Sydney opened the station wagon and placed the document box on the passenger seat. "But it made both of you show me exactly what you want." Montgomery did not keep them waiting. He met Sydney, Tammy, and Jacob in a small conference room at the back of his office. Jacob carried the open fiddle body in a padded repair cradle. The top plate traveled separately between layers of clean cloth. Montgomery locked the door after they entered. "Put everything on the table," he said. Sydney laid out both notes, the ledger, the sealed letter, and the photograph of Michael inside the filled storage room. Montgomery read the first note. He held it beneath a lamp and checked both sides. Then he compared its handwriting with the second note. "Did either leave your possession?" he asked. "The first was at the workshop for a few hours." "Who saw it?" "Jacob, Tammy, Isabella, and me." "Isabella didn't read it. She saw the cavity," Jacob said. Montgomery noted that on a legal pad. He examined the ledger next. His expression changed when he reached the final entries. "You expected this?" Sydney said. "I knew Michael maintained a private collection. Did you know there were 37 instruments?" "No." "Did you know where they were?" "I knew lot 14 contained secured personal property. Michael never gave me an inventory." "Then what did you put in the trust?" "The land, the structure, and property Michael transferred into it over time." Sydney leaned forward. "There is a trust." "Yes." "Who owns it?" "A trust owns property for its beneficiary. In this case, the beneficiary was identified through a private condition Michael established when he created it. In 2003. Yes. I wasn't born. No, but he planned for the person who would eventually receive it. Why make me find it this way? Montgomery glanced at the sealed letter. I believe Michael wanted to answer that himself. You told me you couldn't discuss anything until you saw the documents. I've seen them. The first condition has been met. What's the second? Montgomery turned the fiddle body toward him. The maker's mark. Sidney bent over the table. Through the open top, Michael's usual stamp was visible near the lower block. It read, M. Bowen, Kent, Connecticut. Sidney had seen similar marks in instruments he made for customers. That's his normal mark, she said. It's part of it. Jacob adjusted the lamp. A second mark had been burned into the inside of the back plate near the neck block. It was smaller and partly hidden beneath a thin wash of varnish. 3 letters appeared inside a narrow oval. SLB. Sidney touched the air above them without touching the wood. My initials. Your full initials, Montgomery said, including Lauren. Sidney looked at him. You knew they were there? I knew what Michael described in the trust instructions. I had never seen the finished fiddle. Can you confirm it? No. That requires someone independent. Montgomery opened his office door and asked his assistant to call Evan Jennings. Evan arrived an hour later carrying a hard black equipment case. He was compact, soft-spoken, and wore magnifying glasses on a cord around his neck. He greeted Jacob first. I heard Michael finished one last instrument, he said. He did, Jacob replied. Evan had certified Michael's consignment work since 2009. He had photographed labels, checked repairs, traced ownership histories, and occasionally told Michael that an instrument he loved was not what he hoped it was. Michael trusted him because Evan was willing to disappoint people. Sidney showed him both notes before he examined the fiddle. Do you understand what I'm being asked to certify? He said. That my father made it, and that the interior mark was placed during construction, not added after his death. Yes, this may take time. Take it. Evan photographed the full body, the neck joint, each block, and the exposed edges where Jacob had removed the top. He examined tool marks under a bright, movable light. Then he opened his equipment case and took out a small ultraviolet lamp. The varnish glowed in uneven shades. What does that show? Sidney asked. Age, disturbance, and material differences? Fresh varnish usually reacts differently from the surrounding surface. He passed the light over the initials. No recent disturbance, he said. He measured the burned lines and compared them with enlarged photographs of other Bowen marks stored on his tablet. Michael cut his stamps by hand, Evan explained. The small defects repeat. This nick in the oval appears on authenticated marks from his later work. Could someone copy it? They could try. He examined the narrow false lining Jacob had removed. The cavity was made before the neck was set, he said. That's what Jacob thought. Jacob was right. Evan spent another 40 minutes checking the wood, corner shapes, purfling, and internal knife work. Sidney's attention moved between his hands and Michael's initials. Finally, he removed the magnifying glasses. In my professional opinion, Michael Bowen made this fiddle. The SLB mark was burned into the back plate during construction. The neck block cavity was also original to the build. Neither was added after completion. Can you put that in writing? Montgomery asked. I can have a signed report by tomorrow. Montgomery looked at Sidney. A written report is better, but his examination satisfies my duty under the private release instructions. He unlocked a cabinet built into the conference room wall. From it, he removed a thick envelope sealed with red wax and reinforced tape. The front read, Lot 14. Release only upon verified presentation. Michael had signed across the seal. Montgomery broke it. Inside were the original trust documents, a property deed, later transfer schedules, and a short set of instructions written in plain language. Montgomery read the controlling section silently before turning the page toward Sidney. The trust was created in August of 2003, he said. Michael transferred Lot 14 into it at that time. The transfer was permanent. The land stopped being his personal property once the trust accepted it. So, it wasn't his when he married Isabella. Correct. He married her 11 years later. Could he leave it in his will? No. It was not part of his probate estate. Sidney looked at Jacob. That's why it wasn't read with everything else. Yes, Montgomery said. Who is the beneficiary? You are. Sidney read the page. Her name appeared in a later identification schedule, tied to the presentation condition described in the original instrument. The language was formal, but the meaning was plain enough. Michael's biological child, identified through the handmade instrument, the concealed note, and the authenticated mark, would receive the beneficial interest in Lot 14 and all property properly held there. Properly held, Jacob repeated. What does that mean for the instruments? We must confirm they were transferred into the trust and weren't merely stored there, Montgomery said. Sidney opened the ledger to the location codes. Montgomery compared the entries with the transfer schedules. Each schedule used the same codes. One by one, he matched all 37. The collection belongs to the trust, he said. If the instruments remain on the property, they belong with the property. And I own it. You are the sole beneficiary. I remain successor trustee until the release paperwork is recorded and the property passes into the form Michael directed. But no one else has a beneficial claim under this document. Can Isabella contest it? Anyone can file a motion. That doesn't mean they'll succeed. She'll say it was business property. The trust predates both her marriage and her involvement with the atelier. The transfer records show Michael used personal funds. Chad offered to buy my claim. Don't sign anything. I wasn't going to. Montgomery handed her the sealed letter. The mark is confirmed. You may open this now. Sidney used a letter opener from the table. Michael's handwriting covered 4 pages. He wrote that Lauren's fear had never been about money alone. She wanted Sidney to have a place nobody could remove her from when family loyalties changed. Michael had bought the mill years earlier without knowing who would one day receive it. After Lauren died, he decided the old property would become the place they had promised. He restored it slowly and kept it outside later marriages, business disputes, and ordinary estate division. He wrote about the instruments too. Some had come to him damaged and nearly forgotten. Others had been caught in estates where nobody knew what they held. He restored them privately because selling them through the atelier would have mixed them with the business Isabella later inherited. He placed each one in the older trust after ownership was clear. The letter ended with a paragraph Sidney read twice. I left you the fiddle because the will had to look complete without Lot 14. I knew a person who cared only about obvious value would see an ordinary instrument. I also knew you would try to repair what was damaged instead of throwing it away. That was not a test of whether you deserved anything. You already did. It was how I kept the door in your hands. Sidney lowered the pages. No one hurried her. Tammy looked at the table. Jacob stared through the conference room window. Montgomery finally slid a small card from the trust packet. This is the access sequence for the inner storage room. They returned to the mill before evening. The sequence worked on a narrow keypad hidden beneath the far rack. A motor released somewhere behind the insulated panel. The entire rack shifted forward on concealed floor tracks. Cold, carefully controlled air touched Sidney's face. A steel door stood behind it. Montgomery used a trust key kept in the sealed packet. He opened the lock, then stepped aside. Sidney pulled the door. Instrument cases filled the room from floor to ceiling. Dark leather, worn canvas, polished wood, and modern composite shells rested in numbered spaces. A quiet backup system hummed near the rear wall. Jacob entered first to check the humidity display. Stable, he said. Everything looked stable. He opened the case matching the first ledger entry. Inside lay a violin with deep amber varnish and an old repaired break near the lower edge. Michael's inventory card was tied to the handle. Sidney checked another case. Then a third. All 37 were there. Montgomery locked the outer mill door, while Sidney signed a temporary property receipt and acknowledgement of her rights under the trust. He gave her copies of the documents and placed the originals in a fireproof case. Until the recording is complete, don't allow anyone inside without me, Jacob, or a qualified appraiser present, he said. Not even Isabella, especially not someone who may claim the collection belongs to the estate. Sidney put the new trust key on a separate ring. The fiddle had named the lot. The mark had named her. Now the deed, the ledger, and 37 numbered cases all said the same thing in forms no one could brush aside. She closed her hand around the key and kept it out of sight. For 9 days, the key stayed in a zippered pocket inside Tammy's purse whenever Sidney wasn't using it. Montgomery filed the papers needed to record the trust transfer. He also sent formal notice to Isabella because she represented Michael's probate estate and controlled his business interest. Isabella responded through an attorney. A process server delivered the motion to Tammy's house on a Tuesday morning in July. The filing argued that Lot 14 had been maintained with workshop money and used to conceal business inventory. It asked the probate court to treat the mill and collection as undisclosed estate property. Until the judge reviewed the claim, the transfer was paused. Sydney read the temporary order at the kitchen table. It says, "I can't remove anything," she said. "It also limits access," Montgomery told her over the phone. "The court wants the property unchanged. I wasn't changing the collection. I know, I was fixing the building. For now, you stop. What happens if the roof leaks? We request emergency access. To my own property? To property under review." Sydney looked through Tammy's kitchen window. The station wagon still held a bag of work gloves and a box of nails from their last trip. "Isabella did this because I wouldn't move home. She did it because she believes a public claim gives her leverage." "Does it?" "For a few weeks, yes." The hearing was scheduled for August. Jacob installed a battery alarm on the mill door with the court's permission. He was allowed inside once, accompanied by Montgomery, to check the climate system and confirm the instruments remained secure. After that, the building stayed closed. At 11:30 one Friday night, the alarm sent an alert to Jacob's phone. He called Sydney before he called anyone else. "Front door sensor," he said. "It's open. I'll meet you there." "No. Stay with Tammy. It's my building. It's dark, isolated, and someone forced a door. I'm already getting dressed." Tammy drove. Jacob reached Bulls Bridge Road first and waited at the entrance with his headlights off. When the station wagon stopped behind his truck, he walked to Sydney's window. "We call the police and stay here," he said. A faint light moved between the mill's upper windows. "Someone's inside," Sydney said. "That's why we stay here." Then the light disappeared. A door slammed near the riverside. Jacob turned. A figure crossed behind the mill, carrying a long black case. Sydney recognized the jacket. Chad. She was out of the car before Tammy could stop her. Chad reached the gravel track and saw them. He lowered the case to one side. "What are you doing here?" Sydney asked. "You shouldn't be here." "That's my question. I'm securing property that belongs to the estate. At midnight?" The court froze access. "Yes, including yours." Chad shifted his grip. The case was too long for a violin. It could have held a cello or several smaller cases packed together. Jacob stepped between him and Sydney. "Put it down. You don't own this place, neither do you." Chad's face shone with sweat. "Mom has a pending claim. These instruments shouldn't be left in an unsecured building." "You forced the door," Sydney said. "It was already damaged." The lie came quickly. He had prepared it before arriving. Sydney could see a pry bar sticking from his open tool bag near the side entrance. "Who are you taking it to?" she asked. "No one. The investor?" Chad looked at her. That was enough. Jacob reached for the case. Chad pulled it back. "Don't touch me. I'm taking the instrument inside. You're not taking anything." They both caught the handle. The case swung between them and struck the stone corner of the building. Wood cracked beneath the outer covering. All three stopped. Chad released it first. Jacob lowered the case to the ground and opened the damaged latch. Inside was a cello with reddish-brown varnish. One corner of the interior cradle had broken, but the instrument itself appeared untouched. Sydney checked the inventory card. It matched a ledger entry. "You could have destroyed it," she said. "I was trying to protect it." "No, you were trying to move it before the judge could say it was mine." Chad looked toward the road. Tammy stood beside the station wagon, speaking to the police dispatcher. His shoulders dropped. "I need the money," he said. "You told me. You don't understand what happens if I don't pay. Then tell the people you owe that you don't have it. They don't accept that. So you came here. I thought one instrument would cover it. You don't even know what this one is worth. I know enough." The approaching lights appeared through the trees. Chad looked at Sydney. "Don't do this." "I didn't." He had no answer to that. The police photographed the forced side door, the pry bar, and the damaged case. Montgomery arrived shortly after 1 in the morning. He gave the officers a copy of the access order and asked that the instrument remain at the mill until the court approved an inspection. Sydney did not ask for Chad to be arrested. She also did not ask anyone to excuse him. The incident report became part of the probate file. 3 days later, the court approved a supervised appraisal. Brooke Lynn arrived from Hartford, wearing flat shoes and carrying 2 rolling cases of equipment. She had worked in rare instrument acquisitions long enough to move through the mill without touching a surface unnecessarily. "I've heard about a private Bowen collection for years," she told Sydney. "From whom? Dealers, retired musicians. One estate representative who swore Michael bought an 18th century Italian violin with a broken neck and made it disappear. He restored it. I hoped that was true." Montgomery unlocked the inner room. Jacob checked the humidity display before Brooke began. She worked through every case. For each instrument, she compared Michael's ledger entry with the object in front of her. She photographed labels, measured bodies, examined repairs, and noted ownership records. Evan joined them for the instruments that required independent identification. The appraisal took 2 full days. Sydney stayed beside Brooke for nearly all of it. She learned which repairs increased confidence and which raised questions. She saw where Michael had replaced damaged edges so cleanly that the new wood vanished into the old. On the second afternoon, Brooke closed the final case. "The land and building need a separate real estate assessment," she said. "Based on the current local range, the property itself is likely worth several $100,000. "And the instruments?" Sydney asked. "Conservatively, just under $4 million as a collection." Tammy sat down on the cot. Brooke looked through her notes. "Combined, I would place the current value near $4,200,000. Sydney heard the amount clearly. It still did not feel attached to anything in the room. "Would your gallery buy them?" she asked. "Some. Possibly all, if our board approved the acquisition." "For how much?" "I'd need to submit a formal offer after the ownership dispute is resolved." "What would happen to them?" "Some would be sold to collectors, some placed with performing musicians. A few might go into institutional holdings, so they'd be separated." "Probably." Brooke did not soften the answer. That made Sydney trust her more. "What if I don't sell?" "Then you need insurance, professional storage, security, maintenance, and a plan for use. A valuable collection can become a burden very quickly." Sydney looked at the numbered cases. Michael had not written that she must keep them. He had placed the choice with her, along with the cost of making it responsibly. "Prepare the appraisal," Montgomery said. "Not an offer?" Brooke nodded. "That's what I'll do." By the morning of the hearing, Isabella's claim had expanded. Her attorney argued that Michael had used atelier labor, materials, customer relationships, and his professional reputation to build the collection. Even if the land sat in an older trust, the motion said, the instruments had become marital or business assets during his marriage. The courtroom was smaller than Sydney expected. Wood benches faced a raised desk. A court clerk arranged files beside the judge's chair. Isabella sat at the claimant's table in a navy suit. Chad sat beside her. He had shaved and covered the scrape on his wrist from the broken case latch with a white bandage. Sydney sat with Montgomery. Jacob, Tammy, Evan, and Brooke waited on the bench behind them. Isabella's attorney gave the opening statement. He described Michael as a sick man who had concealed assets during the last months of his life. He said Sydney had entered a property she did not own, removed private records, and relied on sentimental notes that had not been admitted through the probate estate. Sydney listened without reacting. Montgomery wrote one sentence on his pad. "Let them establish their full position." Isabella testified first. She said the atelier had supported Michael's work for decades. She said wood, tools, and expertise from the business must have been used at the mill. She said Michael's collection belonged with the company she inherited, where it could be accounted for properly. "Did you know about Lot 14 during your marriage?" her attorney asked. "No." "Did Michael ever tell you he intended to remove assets from the marital estate?" "No." "Do you believe he would intentionally leave you responsible for a business while hiding millions of dollars in related inventory?" "No." "I believe he was confused near the end, or influenced by people who did not understand the business." Her eyes moved briefly toward Jacob. The attorney asked whether she wanted to take Sydney's inheritance. "Of course not," Isabella said. "I want her protected. But an 18-year-old cannot safely manage a collection of this value without family oversight." Sydney felt Tammy shift behind her. She remained still. Chad testified next. He admitted entering the mill, but claimed he had acted to prevent assets from disappearing before the hearing. "Were you trying to sell the cello?" his attorney asked. "No." "Were you acting for personal gain?" "No." "Did you believe the collection belonged to your mother's business interest?" "Yes." "Did Sydney give you permission to enter?" "No, but she did not have the authority to deny access to estate property." The attorney returned to his table. Montgomery did not cross-examine immediately. He asked the judge for one clarification. Mr. Solis's position is that he entered as an agent of the estate? That is our position, the other attorney said. And Mrs. Solis adopts his conduct as an attempt to preserve estate assets? Isabella looked at Chad. For one moment, she saw the safer answer and almost took it. Then control mattered more. Yes, she said. He was protecting what Michael left under my responsibility. Montgomery wrote down her answer. Sidney understood why he had waited. Isabella and Chad had now placed everything in one public version. The mill was business property. The collection belonged to the estate. Michael had not deliberately excluded it. Chad had acted for Isabella, not for his debt. The judge looked toward Montgomery. You may present the respondent's evidence, she said. Montgomery stood and buttoned his jacket. His first witness was Montgomery himself. He identified the original trust, the deed transferring Lot 14, and the sealed release instructions. What date was the trust created? The judge asked. August of 2003. And Michael Bowen married Isabella Solis when? 2014. The judge turned one page. So, the property entered the trust 11 years before the marriage. Yes. Could Mr. Bowen later leave this property through his will? No. It was no longer his probate property. Montgomery placed the first note beneath the document camera. Michael's handwriting appeared on the courtroom monitor. Sidney, Lot 14, Bulls Bridge Road. Ask Tammy about the mill. Everything you need is already yours. Dad, a cracked fiddle was her father's last gift. At 18, a note in its body named the lot of her home. Montgomery explained how the note, the instrument, and its hidden mark satisfied Michael's release condition. Then he called Evan. Evan placed photographs of the open fiddle beside earlier authenticated Bowen marks. He showed the repeated nick in Michael's handmade stamp and the undisturbed varnish over Sidney's initials. Could those initials have been added after Michael Bowen died? Montgomery asked, not without leaving visible disturbance. There is none. Were they part of the original construction? Yes. Whose initials are they? Sidney Lauren Bowen's. The judge studied the enlarged photograph of the burned letters. Jacob testified next. He described the wood that disappeared from Michael's private stock, the work Michael completed away from Studio Hill Road, and the records showing that none of the 37 instruments entered the atelier's inventory. Did the partnership pay for Lot 14? Montgomery asked. No. Did it pay for the collection? Not according to any business record I have reviewed. Would those records have been available to Mrs. Solis after she inherited Michael's controlling share? Yes. Isabella looked down at her folded hands. Brooke gave the collection's value. She explained that she had examined every instrument with Sidney present and had matched each one to Michael's private ledger and trust schedules. Your combined estimate? Montgomery asked. Approximately $4,200,000, including the land and mill. The number moved through the room without a sound. Chad stared at the table. Isabella did not look at him. Tammy was the final witness. She spoke about Lauren's hospital room in 2011. She did not make the promise sound grand. Lauren had been frightened. Michael had been exhausted. Two married people had tried to protect their daughter from changes neither could predict. What did Michael promise? Montgomery asked. That Sidney would have a place nobody could vote her out of or make her ask permission to enter. Did Mrs. Solis have any part in that promise? No. Michael had not met her. Was the promise intended to punish a future wife? No. Lauren didn't know who that person might be. She wanted one thing kept whole for Sidney. Isabella finally raised her eyes. For the first time, she understood that the mill was not a judgment Michael had secretly passed on their marriage. Its roots reached back before her. She had turned it into a contest because she could not tolerate being outside his decision. Montgomery then handed Chad the police incident report. You testified that you entered the mill as an agent of the estate. Yes. Before that night, did you offer Sidney $40,000 for her claim? Chad glanced at his mother. Yes. Did you tell her you owed a private lender $20,000? His attorney rose, but the judge allowed the question. Yes, Chad said. Was that debt due within 60 days of the will reading? Yes. Did Mrs. Solis authorize you to remove the cello? Chad's mouth opened. Isabella's voice came from beside him. No. The judge looked at her. Isabella swallowed. I did not authorize him. I learned he had gone there when the police called. Her earlier statement had protected her control. Now it threatened to make her responsible for something she had not ordered. Then your testimony that he acted for the estate was incorrect? The judge asked. Yes. Chad leaned back. He seemed smaller without his mother's version around him. Montgomery returned to his table. The judge reviewed the deed, the trust schedules, Evan's report, and Brooks' appraisal. When she spoke again, her voice was plain. Lot 14 was transferred irrevocably before the marriage and never entered Michael Bowen's probate estate. The collection was separately transferred into that trust through the documented schedules. Sidney Bowen satisfied the trust's identification and release conditions. She dismissed Isabella and Chad's claim. The temporary restrictions ended. Sidney was affirmed as sole beneficiary and owner under the trust's transfer terms. No one celebrated in the courtroom. Outside, Chad stood near the stone steps while Isabella spoke with her attorney. "I'll pay for the cello case," he said. "You should," Sidney replied. "I wasn't going to sell it right away." Sidney looked at him. "That doesn't help." He nodded. She did not promise that things would return to normal. There had been nothing normal worth returning to. Isabella approached after Chad walked away. "I was wrong about the mill," she said. "Yes. I still believe you'll need help managing it." "I have help." Her eyes moved toward Jacob, Tammy, Montgomery, Evan, and Brooke. "I see that," she said. A week later, Isabella brought Sidney the curtains Lauren had sewn. They were clean, folded, and packed in a proper storage box instead of a trash bag. Sidney accepted them at Tammy's door. "I'm not moving back," she said. "I know, and the collection won't join the Studio Hill business." Isabella held the box a moment longer, then released it. "I know that too." It was not forgiveness. It was a boundary both of them finally understood. Brooke returned to the mill in late August with a written offer for the full collection. Sidney read it at the work table while Jacob repaired the damaged cello case. "It would solve every maintenance problem," Brooke said. "It would also empty the room." "Yes." Sidney closed the folder. "What if I sold 2 and kept the rest? That would fund insurance, restoration, and several years of operation. And could some be loaned to musicians, if they're properly insured and monitored?" Sidney looked at Jacob. "Could this place work as an atelier? It already has benches, power, humidity control, and more roof leaks than I'd prefer." "That sounds like yes. It sounds like work. Will you do it with me?" Jacob set down his clamp. Isabella had offered to buy his share of the Studio Hill operation. Until that moment, he had not decided. "Yes," he said. "But you start as an apprentice. I own the building. And you still don't touch varnish without asking." Sidney smiled. "Fine." They sold 2 instruments through Brooks' gallery. The money paid for the roof, security, insurance, heating, and repairs to the mill wheel. The other instruments remained together. Some stayed in protected storage. Others went out on carefully written loans to working musicians. September brought dry mornings and cold evenings. Sidney and Jacob worked beside carpenters, electricians, and stonemasons. Tammy kept a list of expenses and refused to let anyone call coffee a meal. Evan helped design the secure examination room. Brooke arranged the first instrument loan from the collection. Sidney spent 3 days sanding the old work tables. She learned to close seams, fit pegs, sharpen blades, and stop working before tired hands damaged good wood. Jacob repaired her fiddle last. He cleaned the crack, brought its edges together, and reinforced it from beneath. The line remained visible if the light struck it correctly. "Shouldn't you hide it?" Sidney asked. "I could make it harder to see. Dad said working instruments get hurt." He did. "Leave it honest." Jacob sealed the repair. They hung the new sign on the first Saturday of September. Michael and Lauren Bowen Atelier. The opening was small. Tammy brought food. Montgomery came without a suit. Evan inspected the display cases twice. Brooke delivered a restored violin for a musician scheduled to collect it Monday. Isabella did not attend. Chad sent payment for the damaged case and nothing else. Sidney accepted the payment without reopening the door between them. Near sunset, the last visitor left. Jacob turned off the lights in the secure room. Tammy carried empty serving dishes to her car. If stories about young people rebuilding a life after family betrayal matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. Sidney remained at the center bench. Her repaired fiddle rested beneath the green task lamp, its sealed crack warm in the light. Through the open top during repair, she had seen her initials burned beside the neck block. Now the body was whole again, and its voice had returned. She raised it beneath her chin and played one slow note. The sound moved through the old beams, past the clean benches, and into every room her father had prepared for her. Outside, the river kept moving in the dark. Inside, Sydney lowered the bow and heard the mill settle around her, not as a secret, not as an inheritance waiting to be defended, but as home.